of reprisal if they disagreed with or could not accept his measures, clearly expecting that he would be able to determine or influence the appointment of more amenable candidates. The sting was in the tail. If they chose to stay on, then he demanded loyal collaboration from them. The government's advice turned out to be an early version of the lesser evil premise. The point of considering resignation was reached apparently only when the official, by remaining in office, would provide such services to the enemy that would be deemed to outweigh those benefits for the population that would accrue from him staying at his post. This was as complicated a judgment for the official to make as it was for him to read. If resignation could be triggered only when the official, by staying in his post, was of more help to the occupier than the population, the onus was on the official to work out whether he had crossed such a fine line. The natural tendency would be to find reasons to stay rather than leave. The principle had the effect of making the official feel indispensable, and it was difficult to imagine a better way of getting him to remain in his job. The 1943 statement seemed to remove the possibility of resignation altogether on the grounds that others have so often shown themselves to be prepared to fill vacant posts and obediently follow the directives of the enemy. A clear reference to the NSB. So, because the alternative to the official was worse than the official continuing, the duty of the official was to refuse to implement any unacceptable measure, but only in the case of dismissal may he leave his post. The official could not resign, he could only be sacked. Having absorbed all this, the official would have realized that he was between a rock and a hard place, faced claims on his loyalty that could not really be reconciled, and had to evaluate and measure his conduct during the occupation against these contradictory pressures. Above all, his government seemed to want him to remain at his post for as long as humanly possible, because the likely replacement would be worse for everybody. The assumption that it was their duty to stay put regardless carried many top officials through the occupation. After he became Prime Minister again in April 1942, Laval returned to the old Third Republic ways where politicians often developed close relationships of a patron-client kind with government officials. He often made a point of meeting personally prefects he was appointing or transferring to difficult departments, and they were all testing locations in 1943-4 and even before. In these amiable conversations he, perhaps counterintuitively, usually refrained from giving specific guidance or advice, more than implying that they had the wit, expertise, and experience to handle things themselves. He always leaned heavily on their sense of the dutiful thanklessness of their task, reinforced by his sometimes gnomic remarks on the personal suffering and torments he was experiencing on the nation's behalf at the centre of things. It was not always a game for Laval, and although the level of self-delusion was high, he realized that dutiful patriotic misery resigned officials to their jobs, when, in the circumstances, it was evidently difficult to enthuse them with and about their appointment. Fredericks, after all, stayed on as Secretary-General at the Dutch Interior Ministry for the duration of the occupation of the Netherlands, and justified his longevity in office on the grounds originally supplied by his government superiors. He advised his mayors according to his interpretation of the 1937 guidelines, including the recommendation to avoid resignation. No wonder he was so deeply offended by being held to account for his behaviour during the occupation after the liberation, specifically on the charge that he had failed to prevent the Nazification of municipal government. Although the Belgian government had made the customary preparations for invasion and occupation, the transition from invasion and defeat to occupation was a difficult one, and in this, as in many other aspects, Belgium was a special case. What was specific to Belgium in 1940 was the experience of German occupation of the country in the First World War and Belgian responses to it. The Germans then had favoured Flemings over Walloons, deliberately engineered the fragmentation of the country, and begun to introduce their own administrative and judicial apparatus, while the Belgian civil service went on working to Belgian and international law. In response to industry's refusal to produce for the German war economy, at the cost of high unemployment throughout the war and a huge state, voluntary and charitable welfare effort, the Germans had closed and dismantled factories and deported workers to Germany. The government was nearly present, located in a territorial enclave in the French port of Le Havre, and the king controversially issued a stream of emergency decrees, the constitutionality of which was confirmed legally only after the war had ended. This was quite a legacy and was imperfectly dealt with. It meant that considerable strains and stresses began to show, with the second German invasion in May.